Before we begin, I want to tell you about Intimate Judaism's newest project. Tali Rosenbaum and I have just released Intimacy and Sexuality for Emerging Adults, powered by Intimate Judaism, a new 10-part podcast series designed to give young Jewish adults the kind of honest, thoughtful, and Torah-based guidance about relationships, sexuality, and intimacy that too many of them simply aren't getting. We talk about emotional intimacy and vulnerability, dating and physical boundaries, attraction and sexual desire, anatomy and sexual response, consent and communication, pornography, love and marriage, nida and building intimacy within marriage, some of the difficult questions surrounding sexual orientation and Torah, and more. All 10 episodes of Intimacy and Sexuality for Emerging Adults, powered by Intimate Judaism, are available now. Just click on the links in the description of this podcast.
We, the diaspora Jewish community, is partially responsible for this because we spend so much time talking about Judaism as solely a faith and something you practice, and we didn't talk about peoplehood, we didn't talk about history and embrace the word Zionism, mostly because we never really thought we were going to have to be challenged the way we are, and we wound up making the faith, or a key tenet of the faith, Tikkun Olam, and we bastardized it in this super Christian way, because my understanding of Tikkun Olam wasn't repair the world and sacrifice yourself in the process, and yet that is exactly what we've done here. Exactly that.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is The Orthodox Conundrum. This is The Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. Anti-Semitism in the United States is getting worse. But perhaps just as disturbing is the growing sense that many people no longer recognize it when it appears, particularly when it's expressed through the language of anti-Zionism, social justice, or supposedly progressive politics. My guest today, Dr. Logan Levkoff, has experienced this firsthand. After more than 2 decades teaching sexuality education in the same school, Logan found herself under scrutiny, not because of anything she taught in the classroom, but because some parents discovered that she's an outspoken Zionist, and eventually she was fired. That experience serves as a starting point for a much broader conversation about what's happening to Jews in America today. We discuss anti-Semitism on both the political left and right, increased attempts to distinguish between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and whether American Jews themselves bear some responsibility for failing to teach enough about Jewish peoplehood, Jewish history, and Zionism. We also spend significant time discussing a word that has become increasingly prominent in our political discourse: Islamophobia. Hatred or discrimination against Muslims simply because they're Muslim is obviously wrong. But what happens when accusations of Islamophobia are used to shut down legitimate criticism of Islamism, political Islam, or particular ideas and political figures? And why, when Jews raise concerns about anti-Semitism, is Islamophobia so often invoked alongside it, as though the two phenomena must always be discussed together? This is a conversation about anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, the weaponization of the term Islamophobia, and the increasingly difficult challenge of talking honestly about uncomfortable ideas in a world that seems to have lost its appetite for nuance. And we'll get to that conversation in just a moment. First, read my articles by subscribing to Orthodox Conundrum Commentary on Substack. It's free to join, and you can cancel at any time. Although we atypically do not have bonus content with this week's episode, we have something special, and hopefully a lot of fun, coming up for members next week. Next Sunday, August 23rd, at 8 p.m. Israel time, 1 p.m. Eastern time, I'll be hosting an exclusive live Ask Me Anything for Orthodox Conundrum Commentary members. And when I say anything, I really do mean anything. The Orthodox Conundrum, Orthodoxy, Israel, the IDF, Jewish Coffee House, the sale of the Lakers, the Beatles, the new podcast Tali Rosenbaum and I have just put together, Intimacy and Sexuality for Emerging Adults, what goes on behind the scenes of these podcasts, or anything else you're curious about. The questions can be about the weightiest issues facing the Jewish world, or about subjects that are considerably less consequential, but still worth talking about. Members can send questions in advance to Scott, S-C-O-T-T, at JewishCoffeehouse.com, and of course, you'll be able to ask questions live. The session is open to all Orthodox Conundrum Commentary members and Patreon supporters, and we'll send the link to everyone during the week. So if you've been thinking about becoming an Orthodox Conundrum Commentary member, now is a great time to join. Just click on the membership link in the description of this podcast, and I hope to see you next Sunday. Remember to subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate it and write a review. Continue the conversation on Facebook by joining the Orthodox Conundrum discussion group. Finally, the best way to promote your organization, your business, or yourself is to create a high-quality podcast, and JCH Podcast Productions can help you make that happen. Whether you want to learn how to start your own podcast or want to improve the podcast you already produce, we will make it happen. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. Dr. Logan Levkoff is an internationally recognized sexuality and relationship educator, author, media personality, and unapologetic champion for Jews and Israel. For nearly 3 decades, she has built a career around having the conversations other people avoid. Today, that work also includes Jewish identity, Zionism, anti-Semitism, and raising a generation of proud, fearless Jews. Logan is the founder of Dor Chazak, a parent-teen Jewish leadership initiative, and works with Honest Reporting Education Labs, developing programs in media and narrative intelligence. She's also the host of The Sexy Side of Zionism and, as she likes to say, remains committed to being provocative with a purpose. Dr. Logan Levkoff, thank you very much for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back.
I'd like to talk to you about anti-Semitism. We're talking about a moment in time when every week seems to bring something that's even worse. This week, New York Magazine declared that New York City, where you live, is Habibi City. And
which I can confirm it is not.
You can confirm that it is not?
It is not.
One of the aspects of that particular article, I did not read the article, but I read parts of it. And one of the things that I found most disturbing was that in a certain sidebar, it described the way that some Jews really support Israel, but other people are concerned because of the genocide. As if we're not even debating the fact that that happened. It's almost, that's a given at this point, that there's a genocide, and perhaps tribalism is keeping some Jews from recognizing the truth. I don't think I'm reading too much into it by saying that was the clear implication over there. We'll get there eventually. But I think, Logan, a good way to start off is maybe about 2 months ago, I read an article of yours in the Free Press where you talked about being fired from the secondary school in which you teach, I believe, sex education. Yes. And it was based on not what you taught, but what you believe. Maybe you could tell us that story.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, look, as someone who's in the sexuality space, I've always worked in a lot of different schools in a lot of different capacities. But I just want to be clear that I've never taught Middle East history. I mean, I'm talking about puberty and healthy relationships and sexual health and consent and decision making, but certainly not anything having to do with Israel or the region at all. So I just want to say that right.
That did not enter into your classes.
No, never. Although I will say that the only time being Jewish enters the classroom is when we talk about the fact that some people have penises with foreskin and some people are circumcised. And inevitably someone will say, oh, I'm Jewish, I had a bris. Did you? I mean, that's how it comes up. But that's certainly not talking about Middle East policy.
There is a wide gap between talking about that and advocating for the Netanyahu government's policies.
Yeah. Yes. So I've taught at a lot of different schools for a long time, but there was one school I had been in for probably 21 plus years, teaching their 3 eldest groups, which winds up being the equivalent of about 4th, 5th grade to 8th grade. And I had been there about 3 days a week for, again, 20 plus years. Never an issue. No, lots of families proudly worked there, happily worked there for many, many years. And in December of 25, I randomly received a direct message on Instagram from a father, a name I had never seen before. And I randomly picked it up because I saw that it had something to do with work, with school. And so I picked it up and this man said, hey, just want you to know you're teaching my daughter in a month. I'm so happy and thrilled that you're teaching her. I just want you to know that there's a parent who's calling around telling people you're a Zionist. And you should know, and he said, you should know, we told her we are too, but she's, ruffling a few feathers, basically, is what he said. I replied and said, first of all, I thank you for the note. I'm kind of mortified. I'm mortified that we're even giving this airtime. This is so absurd. But I'm doing a parent workshop in January, and I hope I have the opportunity to meet you in person. And he said, yes, of course, and thank you so much for all you're doing. Great. You know, fast forward, I'll just fast forward a little bit because I wound up I wound up being fired, apparently, for a tweet that someone else had written, a friend of mine, but the retweet was a trans woman who was standing up not only for the trans community, but for Jews and for Israel.
Am I guessing that's Brianna Wu?
That is Brianna Wu. And so you're probably wondering what happened in the middle of those 3 months. Well, in the middle of those 3 months, I continued to do my job. I had a monitor put in my classroom to apparently protect me and the school, I guess to make sure I wasn't bringing my big bad Zionist values into the classroom, despite the fact that I've never actually used that word in a classroom ever. And parents were monitoring every single thing that a group, but obviously a group that was noisy enough to monitor every single thing that I had ever said in public, online, and so on. And they were obviously waiting for a moment to pounce, and they pounced on this retweet suggesting that I was violating policies of inclusivity by retweeting a trans woman standing up for Jews. So, look.
Let me just ask, Logan, I'm sorry, but even within their own perspective, how does that violate inclusivity? Seriously, meaning I understand they don't like Zionists. What is the problem of inclusivity by retweeting Brianna Wu?
So Brianna's tweet said the following. Fun fact, the lunatic theory of infinite genders and non-binary identities was popularized by 90s academic, I might be off a few words, 90s academic Judith Butler, a woman so deranged she thinks Hamas are heroes. Non-binary is a theory, not science, and gender ideology has nothing to do with real transsexuals. Okay?
And this is coming from Brianna, who herself is part of the trans community.
Yes, and who has proudly come out, despite being hated on all sides for Jews in Israel after October 7th in ways that were so above and beyond what she ever, not that anyone needs to do anything, but she came out really hard for us. So
let me just add, only in praise of Brianna, she was a progressive Democrat. She may still define herself that way. And she says the party left her. She doesn't understand what happened to her party after October 7th. But it's not as though she were some far-right provocateur or something like that. She is a trans activist on the left who ran in the Massachusetts congressional race as a Democrat.
That she did do. And she's been an amazing ally and advocate. She's been back and forth to Israel multiple times. She's a rock star, a total rock star. But I think that they paid attention to this first line about the lunatic theory of infinite genders and non-binary identities, which is so absurd, really, because it basically is validating or this line about infinite, because that's the key here, infinite. That the idea that in the world of TikTok, that you could identify as a tree or a sea creature or a mermaid and have that, that those kind of ideologies actually harm the trans community and non-binary communities because they push people into these extremes, which winds up impacting policy and harming the people it matters to most. Right? By the way, I don't teach that there are infinite genders and non-binary identities, right? We talk about gender, we talk about sex. Of course. But I mean, again, I'm certainly not, I'm not pushing anything down anyone's throat at any particular point in time. But look, I think that I know what they told me I was fired for. Everyone else can decide what that was really about, right? I just know that after 2+ decades, I have never had an issue until someone started talking about the Zionist. And there were a small group of parents who were very upset. I mean, one that I called myself Zionist Barbie, which I have to say is so funny to me because that was a name a troll gave me. So I embraced it because I thought it was so funny that they were calling a 50-year-old woman Barbie. I thought it was so funny that people would get the joke. Apparently not so much. They were also very
Well, when you have the
upset
Z
that
word, you're already saying too
well, that,
much.
I mean, obviously, they were very upset that I had written some posts, and not even recent. They were from years earlier that that I said that Jewish students should not be having sex with anti-Zionists. Very upset. I said you should not be sharing your body with someone who denies your right to exist or dehumanizes you. I thought that was like a obvious thing. They apparently didn't like that. And then they were very upset about some of the things I had to say about Mamdani. And my comment, which I will stand by until the end of time, is, I mean, he couldn't condemn Hamas, and he pals around with people who said that America deserved 9/11. I live 10 blocks from what was once the World Trade Center, and I draw a really hard line of terrorism. I'm sorry. I'm pretty good at calling out bad behavior on either side of the political aisle. And I think
And one would think
thing
that wouldn't be a radical stance.
no, I didn't think so either. I didn't think so either. But I really do. I guess for me, I've never hidden who I was from the world. Right. I had a media life. So my words, my statements have always been public. I never said something in a classroom and had to again, I am a sexuality educator who believes that lots of people have different values and beliefs about sex. I'm not there to teach my values about anything. I'm there to give facts and multiple perspectives. But apparently, someone needed a reason to get rid of the problematic Zionist sex ed teacher.
Let me ask you, Logan, obviously this is not something which you can know objectively, but do you think, living in New York, that things have radically changed such that someone would do that now? Or is it was always there in a latent sense, but the political environment has changed, so now they can be more open about their anti-Zionism and their hatred for Zionists?
Oh, yes and yes, which I'm not sure is a fair answer. I mean, I think some of it is new, right? I think the emboldened nature of just being able to cancel people from careers that they've had for decades is, and the confidence and pride in which they do it feels a little new. But it's interesting. I kept thinking back to, and you and I think have talked about this in years past, when my son was in high school, we were way before October 7th, we were dealing with all the things that we're seeing on college campuses now. At no point in that whole time that we were fighting anti-Semitism masked in the language of human rights and anti-Zionism, whatever, at no point did I ever say, I want all of those teachers fired. Instead, what I did was I sat with my kids and we talked about the history of the Jewish people. We had timelines. We talked about, like the political climate. We literally gave them all the tools needed so that if something about Israel or Jews came up in a classroom, they would be prepared and feel confident enough to respond. I would never say fire someone for believing something different than me, but I was going to give my kids the tools to be prepared to speak up. Obviously, that's changed. I don't know. I guess discourse is problematic. It's a sad, pathetic state of the world.
So let's talk about Mamdani, whom we just mentioned. Mamdani scares me very much only because he is so charismatic. He is so well-spoken and soft-spoken. And his obvious, what to me is obvious and what to you is obvious, but not to everybody else obvious, hypocrisy. And this is something I've written about in which a lot of people are talking about, his saying in this smooth and suave way that I'm against Israel because I'm against any state that defines itself based on prioritizing one religion. And then he marches in the Pakistan Day parade.
Right.
And let's also be clear. The way Israel prioritizes quote unquote Judaism and the way Pakistan prioritizes Islam are not parallel. You aren't even allowed to write Jewish on your passport in Pakistan because that itself is almost a crime. One person, I think, in the past 80 years was able to do so, got permission somehow. We're talking about a vastly different situation. And yet, even according to his own parameters, he's simply a hypocrite and a liar. The question is, what can be done about this? Because people don't seem to care. I'll even give one anecdotal piece of evidence that made me very nervous before he was elected. I was once watching a clip, a reel that showed up on my Facebook feed. And the reel was the news weekend update on Saturday Night Live. And as Colin Jost, I think, was the one who was talking, he mentioned the name Mamdani. This is before the election, probably in October. And cheers came up from the crowd. The reason that was chilling to me was that Saturday Night Live has been defined by its own creator as the loyal opposition. They're supposed to be against everybody. I had never myself heard a candidate, simply by his name being mentioned, be cheered by the audience. They're making fun of everybody. So how could it be that this is the case? Somebody who is an open anti-Semite, somebody who is going to make life very difficult for Jews, or at least Zionists. We could talk about whether there's a difference. So anyway, I'm just saying a lot of words right now, Logan, but this scares me. And you're in New York.
I know. So I would say, first of all, I find SNL these days to be, I can't even watch it. I find the whole thing to be disgusting. It is so obviously political in ways that are just, I mean, they're like offensive at this point. It's not even an equal opportunity.
I actually feel that way about all late night shows at this point, for the most part.
Yes. Yeah. No. I can see that, but I find it just we can't even watch it. I spend the whole time waiting for someone to say something anti-Semitic, which inevitably they do, and then I have to sit and like just be all riled up for the rest of the night, and there's nothing enjoyable about it at all. There's certainly nothing funny. Mamdani is a real problem, right? And he's not the only one. I mean, look at what's happening in Michigan. But there is no question that, for those of us who live here, who are New Yorkers through and through, do we feel a difference in this city? Yes. I would say for someone who's never been to New York City, right? New York is still amazing and big and exciting, and you don't necessarily see the little things. But for those of us who work here, who use public transportation, whose kids are in the educational system here, who know enough to, look at the light posts and the poles all over and see disgusting anti-Semitic material and stickers all over the place, we notice. Like, we see it, and we see a difference. When you have, what no Zionists allowed painted on your subways, like that's great. Like that's just great. And on day one of his term, he rolled back the IRA definitions, right? Like on day one, like he didn't have anything better to do. He's a raging anti-Semite, and I think. And
by the way, those definitions you're referring to is the International Holocaust Remembrance definition, which is that somebody who denies Israel as the Jewish homeland, that's considered a form of anti-Semitism. That's what you're referring to. He rolled that back. We don't accept that anymore.
Yes, he rolled that back. He didn't vote for one of the protections to protect schools from protesters. Let's just say he makes it abundantly clear that he doesn't like us. But the fact that, and again, it wasn't the majority of Jews. It was not. But the fact that almost 30% of Jews here did is a huge, huge problem. And I will say it for the 1,000th time. We, the diaspora Jewish community, is partially responsible for this because we spend so much time talking about Judaism as solely a faith and something you practice, and we didn't talk about peoplehood, we didn't talk about history and embrace the word Zionism, mostly because we never really thought we were going to have to be challenged the way we are, and we wound up making the faith, or a key tenet of the faith, tikkun olam, and we bastardized it in this super Christian way, because my understanding of tikkun olam wasn't repair the world and sacrifice yourself in the process. And yet that is exactly what we've done here. Exactly that.
One of the things that I find to be so troubling is the very fact that because we have defined ourselves exclusively as a faith, or at least some people have. Therefore, that gives an opening to people like Mamdani to have advisors who are Jewish, people who are supporters. He's, look at these good Jews over here. We can talk about who those people are. And
there are a lot of them in his camp. They're only good Jews in his camp. That's it.
Right. They're only good Jews. I would almost say, to me, and this might be unfair because I'm not an expert in Christianity, but it might be saying the equivalent in some way of saying that, I am totally fine with Christians. I am totally fine with Christian belief. I revere the Christian faith. Now here comes my metaphor. I do not mean this, of course. I'm simply using it as a silly but telling metaphor or example. Let's say I were to say that I think the Trinity is terrible and it's a violation of Christianity. And I can prove that that's okay because, look, I can point to Unitarians, these wonderful Christians. See, I love Christianity. These Unitarians are Christians, right? I love Christians, but I'm taking a fundamental Christian idea for the vast majority of Christians, denouncing it, and then pointing to the minority. I've got nothing against Unitarians, but pointing to them as the exemplars of what I want to believe, and therefore they can serve. I'm not, obviously, so that's the end of my metaphor. But essentially, those good Jews who denounce Zionism, they're acting as, in my metaphor, the Unitarians representing all Christians when they just don't. And if I offended any Christians, I hope I didn't. I'm just trying to give an example.
No, but I think it's important that in a world, I don't know about you, but I remember a time when everyone talked about the fact that tokenism was racism. I remember that. Like, that was everywhere. And now, for whatever reason, tokenism isn't racism if the tokens are Jews. That's basically the lesson here.
So you said before, New York is not Habibi City. What do you mean by that? Why is it not yet Habibi City? Which, according to the New York article, means that it is now being, I don't know exactly what it means, but essentially being overtaken by Palestinians, Iranians, presumably the Iranians who like the government in Iran. That's presumably what they're talking about.
I mean, that's the whole thing. And that there's one way to be a New Yorker, and that New Yorker has to have a particular set of values and beliefs. I mean, the fact that there was an article that even referred to, quote, the land mass known as Israel, land mass known as Israel.
That article said that, correct?
Yeah. There were, yes. I mean, so many horrible things. It's
Logan,
really
I'm actually looking at it right now, and it says the landmass currently called Israel. And also in that same article, it describes these New Yorkers as facing xenophobia, Islamophobia, and Zionism, as if Zionism is something that you have to face like Islamophobia or xenophobia.
Right. Clearly problematic on a number of levels. But what I want to just go back for a sec, because I find the Mamdani phenomenon so interesting, terrifying, and horrible, but also fascinating, because the people who vote for him or voted for him predominantly are people who have been here 10 years or less, which is interesting when you think about the language of colonizers.
Do you mean in New York or in the United States?
In New York.
I mean, people who are recent transplants to New York, even if they're Americans.
To New York City, yeah. Yes, sorry. So I feel like it's so fascinating because in the language of colonization, I kind of feel like the people who haven't paid their dues, haven't lived in New York, haven't understood the diversity and the hustle that is New York, were making decisions that they wanted to make based on their own set of values, wanting to colonize my city, right? My city, which is a hustle city. There was a reason the song goes, if I could make it there, I could make it anywhere. Not everyone makes it here. It's rough. It's hard. But you know what? You learn a lot about yourself in the process. But we're not a handout city. And by the way, we're certainly not a socialist city. And we never will be, despite the fact that our mayor wants to have free buses, which he'll never have, and free supermarkets, and just doxed an entire population of New Yorkers for fun. That's where we are now.
It's very, very troubling in so many different levels. You know, one of the things that, of course, can be reassuring is the fact that he can never be president because he was not born in the United States. On the other hand, someone like Abdul El-Sayed, in theory, I think he was born in the United States, so he's eligible. And there's an example. You mentioned him before. He is the Democratic candidate for Senate in Michigan. He won the primary over there. This is the person who, when somebody drove a car into a Michigan synagogue, which had preschoolers in it, and then tried to kill them, he condemned and then said, you have to understand, hurt people hurt people. And why do hurt people hurt people? Because the synagogue attacker had a relative who is a Hezbollah terrorist in Lebanon who was eliminated by Israel after Hezbollah started attacking Israel. This was not somebody who was an innocent civilian caught in crossfire. This is somebody who was literally a terrorist. His relative in Detroit decided to take revenge. And then Abdul al-Sayed said, well, that's not acceptable, but you have to understand there's a context. That is where we are today. That is crazy. And this person won the primary.
They won the primary, and America is at a real, I'm not even going to say America. I'm going to say Democrats are at a real crossroads here, because yes, and Jews in particular have predominantly leaned left, again, because a lot of social issues. But this is one of those existential crises for us here. And this, vote blue no matter who does not work anymore. And I understand, as someone who spent my life fighting for trans issues and reproductive choice and all of the things that were important to me, I understand that someone like Mike Rogers, who's the Republican candidate in Michigan, is the antithesis of those values. But I also know that I need to exist as a Jew so I can fight for the things that are important to me versus someone who I know would rather me not be here at all. And that's a really tough conversation that people are going to start to have with each other.
It's funny, or maybe it's not funny at all, but when you go back to Mamdani and talking about the people who are, quote unquote, colonizing New York from elsewhere, I've said this, and when I've mentioned it to people who are Israeli themselves, they roll their eyes. But on some level, the whole idea that Israel is a colonizer, let's leave aside the absurdity of the claim. Let's even put that aside. I mean, also, let's remember, as Bill Maher says, everyone's a colonizer at some point. Even Jews, we don't pretend that we're native to Israel. 4,000 years ago, Abraham went there. It's not as though we came from Israel and just came out of the soil there. Everyone's a colonizer from somewhere. But leaving all that aside, the reason that I say this, I think, what exactly is Mamdani? He himself is an immigrant to the United States. Call it kavod, no problem. He's allowed to run for office now and promote his values there. What is the difference between that and colonization, except that he didn't come as part of an organized group? Effectively, that's a technicality. Isn't it really the same thing? Maybe I'm being silly. Maybe I'm being shallow. But imagine there were millions of Mamdanis who came and they started becoming a majority in a particular area, a city or a state or a country. Why is that not also colonization in the same way that he claims Israel is a colonized state?
I'll tell you why. Because Jews are just the oppressor white people. That's why. I mean, and I say that obviously right, sarcastically, but that's part of it, right? We have absolutely created a system here where for people who historically, the progressive ideology, which historically has seen so much nuance and non-binary thinking about everything. When it comes to Jews and Israel, you've never seen people take such a binary position. It is unbelievable, the hypocrisy. Unbelievable. And I've always said that, and again, it goes back to what we have done wrong here, is we never really talked about a few things as Jewish people. Yes, for sure, Jewish history and Jewish peoplehood, definitely, right? We didn't talk about our connection to language. It's great that I could read from the Torah, but that is not going to help me when I'm hanging out in Israel and I'm trying to have a conversation with someone, right? We needed the cultural connections that we didn't have. And we also didn't really talk about the diversity of the Jewish people, right? That we didn't all look like the, nebbishy guys on sitcoms, which is part of our challenge. And we were so ashamed to acknowledge the fact that some of us were successful that we stopped explaining why we had to be successful and develop certain traits. That to me is a huge problem too. First of all, I mean, clearly we don't really run the media and we don't control the weather, because I would have done things very differently lately. But that being said, why did we have certain success in Hollywood? Well, how about because it was considered a dirty business? We were thrown out of every industry and we had to create something else. Right. And that doesn't mean it's still ours today.
Right. It's like money lending. The reason that Jews were considered greedy was because they were money lenders. But they were money lenders because Christians weren't allowed to be involved in money lending because of laws against usury in the Christian church. And therefore, the Jews did it, which was a service. And then they were blamed for it.
But exactly. But we don't tell that story. I think because we're afraid to even acknowledge that there might be some successes that we've had. So instead, we've done this thing where we have to apologize for who we are in success. I refuse to apologize for success. We are the only people, right, that from the jump, from day one, believed in literacy and the importance of education. We should be talking about that. Why did we develop certain traits and skills? Well, we've had a history of having to flee and take our skills with us, which meant we needed to have professions that could be moved from one place to another, right? That's part of our story.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things you just said, Logan, which I think is very important, is the way that people look at us, and maybe we look at things in general in this binary way where it's good and bad. In my last episode of this podcast, I had on Yossi Klein Halevi. I don't know if you know who he is, but Yossi,
I sure do.
He's fantastic. And the main thing that he was trying to explain is the idea of context, which is another way of saying that Israel is not uniformly and universally right, because no country is always right about everything. No country is, and for us to pretend that it is being unnuanced. But he said, if we understand context, it takes it away from these dumb concepts of genocide and whatever else, which is obviously the furthest thing from the truth, and starts explaining why. He said, if you look at facts, wow, 70,000 people supposedly, but whatever, 70,000 people killed in Gaza. That's really, really terrible. Outside of context, that sounds ridiculous. But once you explain the context, and there's so many different layers to the context, whether it's the fact that Israel was never in Gaza voluntarily, or the fact that Israel left Gaza, or the fact that Hamas is hiding behind civilians, and it's either a choice of destroying Hamas with some civilians or not destroying Hamas at all. There's so many layers of context that have to be explained that it just puts it in a different light. So when you talk about the importance of context, the importance of not seeing things in a binary way, that's what constantly is coming up in my own mind.
So all the time. And I've tried to explain a lot of that. Now, look, I'm obviously a little bit of both sadist and both masochist, because I like to I like to make videos online and try to explain things with a smile, full well knowing that the people who really adore me are just going to be spun out entirely, which is why I did a video yesterday explaining why there isn't a genocide and the history of the word genocide and how intent matters, and how I don't know a genocidal party that ever attempted to vaccinate people in the middle of a war. Full well knowing that I knew that I was going to rile up a certain group of people. And I was okay with that, to be perfectly honest. But what I really was hoping was, I was hoping that I was going to give language to those of us who feel like, I know it's not a genocide, I just don't know how to explain why it isn't. And I need some data points. And I didn't think about that.
But
So
wait a second, Logan. Listen to what you're saying right now. We have to give ammunition to those who want to explain why it isn't. That is the completely backwards world in which we live.
Yes,
in order to show that something is not a genocide, the burden of proof is on you to show it's not a genocide. That's how crazy this is.
Of course.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
It is crazy. No, please. It's absolutely crazy. And just because I say it doesn't mean that I'm okay. I'm okay with it. But I feel like I get so many notes from people saying, I want to say this, I don't know how to say it. And I don't want them to feel like they just have to shut down and take it, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really make a difference how many people like something online. The biggest impact is when it's local, when you can actually look at someone and say, hey, I know you heard this, but did you also know this? Does that change the way you see this word? Like, why would a country attempt to vaccinate over 1 million children if their real intent was to harm them? Why? I mean, just try to explain that to me. And at some point then, we have to ask the other person, if they still are like, no, I don't care that they did that, it's still a genocide, then we have to be willing to say, well, you might just be a Jew hater.
Right. Well, what you're talking about, Logan, is the new, I would call it somewhat postmodern tendency to have language not mean anything. To have language mean whatever I want it to mean, whether that's Kellyanne Conway saying alternative facts, which is another way of saying the same idea, or it's someone saying, you're right, it's not a genocide, but I'm redefining genocide so that it is a genocide, which is effectively what the genocide enablers are doing. That's 100%. Where we are today.
100%. And they are also vicious. In the last 48 hours, I've gotten some of the nastiest, like horrific messages sent to me. But again, I know, sad to say, I know that's part of the territory. And yet I still feel like I refuse to let these narratives go without saying something back. I mean, and again, maybe that's because I'm crazy, and I might be, and that's okay. But I was raised to use my voice for good, and for years I did that in the sexuality space, and again, still leaving room for people to have different values, right? But facts mattered. Facts still mattered, and we could have different opinions and still respect the person sitting in front of us, and still acknowledge, okay, there are facts. I don't always like that they don't support my beliefs, but there's still facts. I do that with, with being a proud Jew, a proud Zionist with Israel. And I always say to people, we put Israel under a microscope. Like, why don't you look in your own backyard first? Like, focus on yourself. You can't locate Israel on a map. You can't even spell half the things you're talking about. Spend some time on your own stuff first. And then we can have a thoughtful conversation.
In fact, I think what you're saying now gets back to that same idea of nuance of you've heard certain slogans and you can repeat those slogans, whether it's the river to the sea without knowing which river and which sea, all the things like that. And that lack
It's
of
even
nuance.
the idea of West Bank. When you ask someone, West Bank of what? Of what? They have no idea.
Right. They don't even know what they're talking about. Right.
They're like, West Bank of Palestine. You're like, no. No.
And sometimes I think, and this gets into the issue of the anti-Semitism sometimes on the right rather than the left. And in fact, today I saw in the Free Press, there's an article by, I believe it's a high schooler named Leo Lewis, which talks about how anti-Semitism in his generation is worse than any of you adults think. And he's talking primarily about the right. He doesn't deny the left, but he talks about what's going on with his friends and what people think about the Groypers, Nick Fuentes, and so on and so forth. It seems to me, not necessarily from what he said, but a lot of it comes down to certain nuance in the same kind of way. So, for example, you mentioned before, Logan, that the Jews controlling the media. Obviously, the Jews don't control the media. Now, if someone were to point out the number of Jewish CEOs of major media companies, it's probably very high, at least a higher percentage than the 2% of Jews in the country. But there's a huge difference, this gets to nuance, between saying the Jews control the media, that article the, and saying Jewish people are heavily involved in media, which is a completely, I assume, true statement, which has no implications beyond the fact that they're Jewish. But calling it the Jews implies a conspiracy, implies that it's a group of people who are all working together in order to have some nefarious purpose.
And it's not new. So one of the things I've been doing is I've been working with Honest Reporting on building out an educational program on media intelligence and narrative intelligence. And I have to tell you, it's been such a joy to put my skills into something that I'm so excited and passionate about. But one of the things we talk about is whether it's the New York Times or the Groypers or whoever it is saying this cabal of Jews running whatever. I mean, it's 1903 Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's just repackaged. It's old stuff. It's old conspiracy theory stuff.
They may not even realize the word Kabbalah itself comes from Kabbalah as a conspiracy.
I say that all the time. You don't even know where the word comes from, do you? And they don't. But they keep perpetuating the old conspiracy theory, Jew hatred. And again, horseshoe theory is horseshoe theory. Left, right. For me, it's not that I'm not worried about anti-Semitism on the right. I'm worried about it. Anti-Semitism to me doesn't have really a left or right. It's Jew hatred no matter what. That being said, I know what anti-Semitism looks like on the right. If I see a guy in a Camp Auschwitz shirt, I pretty much know who's coming at me, right? I am far more angry with the people who I spent years standing next to, who pretended to share the same set of values with me, who I now know would happily stab me in the back if they needed to. Not even if they needed to, just because. Just because I spend a lot of time in Israel. And that to me that's when we talk about integrity, because I really believe, and one of the things I know we're not always supposed to criticize our own, but I do not think it's helpful. And I despise the word influencer. I am certainly not an influencer. I am just a Jewish person who believes in doing what's right. That's it. It doesn't really make a difference what that word means to me. But I have a really hard time with people in the influencer space who love to call out and condemn people in a political party they are not for bad behavior, but never, ever look at the people in their own camp. To me, it's useless. It's meaningless. There is zero integrity there.
That's why someone like James Carville is actually impressing me now, because here's someone who is the most democratic person in the country, basically. This is the person who got Bill Clinton elected twice. And he's saying now, I don't know if I'm going to vote Democrat, because he's open about the fact that the Democratic Party is not the same thing it once was.
Exactly. And there are a lot of people who, and we see it even with politicians. We see it with the way American influencers talk about Israeli politicians. And my theory is this, and again, this is just my own personal code of ethics, which just applies to me. But despite the fact that I want to live in Israel and I spend a lot of time in Israel, I am not Israeli, which means you will not hear me weigh in on Israeli politics, because who am I to tell people who live in Israel, who serve, who send their kids to serve, what they should do and who they should be voting for and the nuances around those decisions, right? That would make me a total I would never, never, never. But there are a lot of people who do. I just don't want to be one of them.
On the other hand, and by the way, I identify with what you're saying. And before I became an Israeli citizen, I moved here and became a citizen 96, 97, officially made Aliyah in 99. But when I was here before that, in 94, I was here for a year. And I remember there was a big thing then, Ha'amim HaGolan. There were signs everywhere that people are with the Golan, not to give away the Golan. That's what it was at that time. This is during Oslo, basically. Yeah. And someone asked me why I did not have a sticker the way everyone else did on my guitar case. And I said, because I am not Israeli. And I, as a non-voter and a non-citizen yet, do not have to live with the consequences of advocating a position which I may or may not agree with. Because if I'm wrong, I'm not the one, as a non-Israeli, who's going to have to live with those consequences in the same way as someone who is a voter. On the other hand, I think it's very important that people outside of Israel feel a sense of kinship with Israel. And that's why I don't fully agree with you, Logan. I appreciate it and I identify with it. On the other hand, as an Israeli, there's a part of me that says I want people who don't live in Israel to feel they have a stake in it. And to say you have to support Israel no matter what is different than saying, I know that's not exactly what you're saying, but to say I'll support anything Israel does is not the same thing. But at the same time, I think there has to be room for non-Israelis to be able to express their opinion as long as they do it in a way which acknowledges the fact they're not yet Israelis and they don't have to live with the consequences the same way.
Yeah, but that would, first of all, that would require nuance. And we are not living in a world where people do that, right? They like to make these big statements. And
see, Logan, I'm the Israeli telling Americans they should say something, and they're the Americans saying, no, we have no right to do so.
Well, listen, I think we all know that if I want to say something or you give me permission to, I'll say a lot of things, believe me. And I believe that no matter what, we should be supporting Israel, not because of her government, but because of her people. Like that to me is that is the baseline for all things. And I believe that I do that and will continue to do that. But I just feel like people are so quick to just make things political when they have absolutely no idea what you are actually dealing with. And and same thing for here too. I mean, obviously you've been here, so it's you have a right to speak up for here too. But I just feel
and I'm still an American citizen, so that gives me and I vote.
You have every single right to speak up for Israel, for Israel and America as voters and citizens because you are. But there are a lot of people, I think, who just use it to either antagonize or just blindly support or blindly deny. And I don't know. I just don't think it's helpful. But I will always fight for Israel. But I
Okay, there are a couple of important points I want to talk about before we go. One of them is one we already addressed, but I want to make sure we address it more directly, and that is the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. You and I both agree that it is true. If someone were to say, no, it's not, I have no problem with Jews, I only have a problem with the Jewish state. And I don't mean a policy, I mean its existence. Because Israel pushed out Palestinians, Israel did X, Y, and Z, the Nakba, whatever reasons they want. How would you tell someone, no, that is anti-Semitism, which I know you would say. And I would say too.
I would absolutely say there is no space between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Denying that a group of people do not have the right to exist in the place that they come from, that they are the only population on the planet who does not have the right to exist and have self-determination is inherently anti that group of people, right? Whether we want to say Jew hatred or anti-Semitic. I would also say that suggesting that Zionism was simply born out of Theodore Herzl and the concept of going home wasn't thousands of years old and part of our story is also denying our peoplehood and our history. And the fact that there are so many double standards, right? Just ask, are you anti-China? Like, are you anti-Russia? Is there any other country you do not believe should exist? Right? And then you start to realize, there's really not a lot of light between those two things.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's extremely reasonable. And I appreciate that.
Well, I'd like to think so.
Yes. So the next topic, which is very important, and I told you before we went on the air, I want to talk about this. This is the idea of Islamophobia. Now, I will say, as an opening statement here, random hatred of Muslims is obviously wrong. Just disliking people because of who they are, of their ethnic background or their belief system, that is wrong. And I don't think you're going to disagree with me. But that's different. And in some ways, even the term, it's not called Muslim phobia, it's Islamophobia. It's a very different thing. And very often it seems to me that whenever anti-Semitism is invoked, very often people will say, even if they agree, we also have to deal with Islamophobia.
Yeah.
They'll talk about, no, we know the numbers are not even comparable. The number of anti-Semitic hate crimes, the number of, I'll call it Islamophobic, whatever that means, hate crimes, they're not comparable. But they always have to put the two of them together as if they're parallel phenomena. Now, I have a lot to say about this, and I also have a lot of questions about it, but I want to get your take about this, because to me, even invoking it in some ways is a form of whataboutism, almost to say, yes, anti-Semitism is terrible, but you guys, that's the implication, are anti-Muslim. So what's your take on that, Logan?
I think the way in which people wield the term Islamophobia as a weapon to make you feel badly for the genuine feelings of strife that you have because of what you are experiencing as Jew hatred is the most pathetic anti-Semitic whataboutism, all of the negative words. And I hear it all the time. And I've been called Islamophobic so many times merely for saying that I don't like a particular person because of the things he does to my people. And the reaction is, oh, you're Islamophobic. I said, Islam had nothing, by the way, Islam actually, I mean, Islamism, yes, had something to do with it. But this person's faith has nothing to do with why I dislike him. And the fact that someone could say it over and over again is a way to basically minimize the things that Jews are feeling. And that's its only purpose. Its only purpose is to delegitimize Jewish feelings and experiences of anti-Semitism. The whole concept of, if we know that anti-Semitic hate crimes have risen exponentially, that should just be the statement. The minute we say, but we also have to acknowledge this, is suggesting that they are on an equal plane. They are not equal. They are not the same. They are not the same.
Part of the question I had, I said I have questions too, is when I alluded before to the fact that there's a difference between disliking a person because of his ethnic or religious background and disliking an idea. And this is where it gets sticky. But for example, if someone says, I'm an anti-communist, and by the way, I am an anti-communist. I think communism is terrible. I think the communist ideas have failed and they are awful. And they will be very, very bad if Mamdani or anyone else tries to implement them in the United States or anywhere else. So I'm an anti-communist. Now, if I were to say I'm I'll use a less damaging term, maybe Islamofascism. Let's say the kind of Islamism which is advocated and put into use in Tehran or some of the extreme Muslim governments. Maybe I can get away with that. If I were to say, though, I'm afraid of some of the extreme beliefs of Muslims. I'm not talking about who they are, but some of their beliefs that are anti-Israel, that are anti-Jewish. And by the way, I'm not going to cite lines from the Quran. Anybody can do that. People can do that.
Anti-feminist, anti-queer. I mean, like, the list goes on and on and on.
Of course. But Logan, I'm going to say this also. I could find things in Jewish writings that people would find very offensive too. So I'm not going to talk about individual lines. I'm talking about certain beliefs that not all Muslims, but literally millions and millions of people do believe that are very, very offensive to Jewish sensibilities, to Western sensibilities. And if I am against that in the same way that I'm against communism, because it's a belief system that wants to run governments, that believes not how they live in their own house, do whatever you want, but they want to try to run a government that will take over where you and I live, whether it's New York or Israel. To me, if that's Islamophobic, that's not a slur anymore, because we're talking about not going against a person, but against a belief. I have questions whether I'm right, but I want to throw that out to you and see if you agree with me.
I think the way in which you describe it makes perfect sense. I think for those of us who live here in the States, don't even understand the concept of Islam or Islamism versus the word Muslim. They don't, right? So if I say something, inevitably, if I say something about Islamists, which I have said more than once, the response to me is, you're Islamophobic. I said, I think that you need to do a little research on what Islamism is and what it means and whether or not it is aligned with your values of like Western civilization and democracy. If you're fighting for feminism and reproductive choice, like I feel like this might not be aligned with that. So part of our problem is that it is a language thing, because it's not just like whether or not it's a phobia or a hatred or a fear. It's also that people don't even know what the word Islam means. They don't know what the word Muslim means. It's just they lump it all together because it is a way to justify whatever nasty thing they are going to say about your feelings.
You see, one of the reasons that I'm ambivalent about this whole concept is because historically, once upon a time, the Catholic Church was very open that it is not anti-Semitic. I'm talking about before World War II. It said anti-Semitism is wrong, anti-Semitism is racial hatred, and that goes against all church teachings. This is long before Vatican II. But they say we're anti-Jewish. We're anti-Judaism, excuse me. We are against Judaism as a belief system. We believe that Judaism as a belief system should be condemned. And obviously, we all roll our eyes and say, that's ridiculous. You're splitting hairs. It's not true. You're anti-Semitic. You're just trying to give it a new term. So when it comes to the way I just described being against a type of Islamic government or fascism, then on some level, I say I'm doing the same thing. I love Muslims. I just don't like this particular belief system. Although the way I might get out of it, and I'm throwing this out to you, Logan, maybe you'll agree or disagree, but on the other hand, when a Christian would be anti-Judaism, it was based on the idea that Jews are trying to take over. That was false. It's like, let us do what we want in our synagogues. We're not trying to do anything to you. Leave us alone. It was based on this conspiratorial idea that Jews want to take over the world. And also the belief that living in a Christian country, we can tell you how to worship, but your way of worshiping is inappropriate, even though it has nothing to do with us. When I'm talking about this fear of certain beliefs of Islam that certain Muslims have, when I talk about that, I'm not talking about whatever you want to do in your own home is fine. I'm talking about the fact that you want to take over governments, and those governments want to destroy Israel. So it's a very different situation because it directly affects me. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say so. And I think it's okay. It goes back to nuance also, that I don't think people understand. They want to paint people with this like wide brush. You are good or bad because of what you say, because of what you believe, as opposed to asking, like, tell me why you feel this way about political Islam. And then you have an opportunity to say, I don't know if you're aware of these are the main pillars. And it's not just about Jews. My issue, honestly, is people love to say, oh, you're being Islamophobic if you're a Jewish person who's concerned about something that a Muslim has said or done.
Whenever we hear Ilhan Omar, for example, or Rashida Tlaib criticized, someone always says that's Islamophobic. They'll say you're criticizing her because she's a Muslim, not because she said something terrible.
Right. It's never about that. It's never about that. It's that the words that come out of their mouths are pretty clear about what they feel about us and the tropes and the stereotypes that they insist on doubling down on all the time. I really dislike the fact that look, I think that racism in all its forms is obviously detestable, but I think that there are questions we can be asking about why people have such beliefs about political Islam. I don't think Americans understand who the IRGC are. Like, it seems like the values of the IRGC are totally antithetical to American values. I mean, maybe I'm crazy. I think the pictures coming out of Dearborn are terrifying. And, at the end of the day, last time I checked, we, Jews, were not interested in getting everyone to be Jewish and bowing to like our belief system. We were actually the antithesis of that.
In fact, I've mentioned to non-Jewish friends of mine in describing Israel, I say, really more than anything else, we truly just want to be left alone. We want to be friends with everybody, but we just want you to leave us alone. We have no quarrel with Lebanon. We have no quarrel with anybody. Just give us our small New Jersey-sized state. Leave us alone. We're not asking to do anything more than that.
Yeah. But the rhetoric and the propaganda, and it's not new, it's old. It just has a different delivery system now, right? So because it's a 24/7 delivery system with zero fact checking whatsoever, it means, and it's the old line, a lie travels the globe a hell of a lot faster than the truth. If I think that if we valued education more, maybe, and civics and debate, things would be different. I remember being as an undergrad, and I was, I think, one class shy of being an official religious studies minor. And it was because I was so fascinated. I wanted to understand the differences. By the way, you know what I really wanted to understand? Why did Salman Rushdie have a fatwa on his head? Like, I really wanted to understand, right? How could you have this figure, this literary giant, and this was the news? I wanted to understand what it was about. And so if people are going to make these giant statements, then they should do some research on what they're fighting for. And I think that's my issue with everything. Everyone is just parroting propaganda and not doing their own research, like real research, like with citations from like real sources, not
Yes.
TikTok.
Okay, so Logan, we're out of time, but I want to ask you just as a final question, do you think that there is reason for hope in the United States? I live in Israel, and I believe there is reason for hope here, Hatikva. I think that things are moving in a difficult but ultimately good direction. But despite that fact, and despite the fact that I have plenty of complaints about the current government, that's a different podcast, I still think things are moving in a positive way. However, do you think things are going to get much worse in the United States, or have things reached a low point and they're going to get better? Because to me, watching it from outside, it seems that every week brings a new low point, and I'm shocked every single time.
So I like to say that I am very proud of being one of the Hatikva people. However, I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better here. And I've been saying that for a long time, for years, only to have people really look at me and say, like, look at me like I was Chicken Little, like the sky was falling, like I was this hyper neurotic Jewish woman. And I said, okay, I don't know. I learned from my grandparents, keep your head on a swivel, like don't get too comfortable. Trust your gut. When you feel like things are not going in a great direction, they probably aren't. And a lot of people wanted to keep their heads in the sand. I think they're seeing that things are at a low, but they're going to get lower. They're going to get lower until we start to clean up the mess in our own backyard. I did a podcast in Israel when I was there for the summer, and someone said, like, what can Israel be doing to help America? And my comment was this. First of all, Israel needs to take care of her own issues. I said, and America has to deal with our own issues, which means having some really hard conversations and fixing the problems that we helped to create, which is creating this monster on both extremes. We have to deal with that. We need to fix the education system. We need to be talking about civics and history and uncomfortable conversations and challenging people who, when you offer another perspective, call you a racist. Like, that's not okay. We have a lot to fix here. I don't expect any of you to do that. We have to do that.
And do you think it's eventually going to come out of it, or is it going to go down and stay down?
Well, no, I think we will come out of it, but I think we have a ways to go, because if we still have people who believe in democracy and Western civilization and liberal values supporting the most illiberal, anti-progressive regimes, right, whether they're in Iran or here, we have a long way to go still.
Okay. Well, on that hopeful note, Dr. Logan Levkoff, it's a pleasure to speak with you. And thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing. Being the Zionist Barbie is a very good thing, and we need you out there. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'd like to offer a word of thanks to our Patreon supporters. Patreon functions as a voluntary tip jar for Jewish Coffee House and our family of podcasts. Patreon supporters at all levels, as well as paid subscribers to Orthodox Conundrum Commentary, will have access to our upcoming private Q&A sessions. Your support in either place helps sustain thoughtful Jewish conversation. Additional bonus material, including the longer episodes with bonus questions, is available to paid subscribers of Orthodox Conundrum Commentary on Substack. No matter how you choose to support this work, we are deeply grateful. Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. Subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. Check out the link in the description of this podcast to get your free subscription today. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been The Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.